Chapter 2781, Heavenly Modest Palace. Xianxia, Xianxia, do you think that you have won? You too have underestimated me. Blood Thunder King's eyes were blood red. He looked like he had lost his mind. A weird smile crept into the corner of his mouth. The smile gave an impression like he was a bloodthirsty beast. Mr. Chen Kong, come out. Blood Thunder King's voice echoed throughout Bane City and between heaven and earth. Jian Wushuang and Xianxia looked sullen. They had a bad feeling about what was about to happen. Sure enough, after Blood Thunder King shouted, more than a dozen figures came charging in from the distant void. All of those more than a dozen figures were dressed in black robes, with an unusually powerful aura. There were a total of 12 of them. If those 12 people were just ordinary primary level and high-level Grand Ultimate Gods, then the combat power of the Jian Wushuang and Xianxia's camps would be able to deal with the opponents easily and they need not be bothered. However, those 12 people appeared and turned Jian Wushuang and Xianxia gloomy. They appeared in front of Jian Wushuang and others in the blink of an eye, standing next to Blood Thunder King. The breadth of aura was imposing. Among those 12 people, 10 of them had reached the level of high-level Grand Ultimate Gods. The most important thing was that the 2 leaders who had surpassed the high-level Grand Ultimate God realm. They were peak Grand Ultimate Gods. The lineup consisted of 2 peak Grand Ultimate Gods and 10 high-level Grand Ultimate Gods. That was jarring even for Jian Wushuang and Xianxia. The Grand Ultimate Gods under their command were shocked. Who are these people? 10 high-level Grand Ultimate Gods and peak Grand Ultimate Gods. This lineup? I haven't seen any of these people. They definitely don't belong to any of the top forces in Danyang continent. Where did they come from? They stared wide-eyed at the 12 powerful men. Blood Thunder King appeared together with the old man in a black robe who headed the group of 12. Mr. Chen Kong. Blood Thunder King had calmed down. Surprisingly, he looked rather humble. Blood Thunder King, didn't you say that as long as you join forces with the Sword Alliance, Xianxia is nothing to worry about and we don't need to anything? You said all we need to do is just clean up the battlefield, no? What's going on? The black-robed elder Chen Kong stared at Blood Thunder King. He looked unhappy. Mr. Chen Kong, I don't want to be like this either, but I didn't expect that the Sword Alliance Master would be on Xianxia's side. They have been cooperating for a long time. I was fooled and lost 5 Grand Ultimate Gods before the fight even began. I have no choice but to let you, Mr. Chen Kong, get involved in advance, said Blood Thunder King. Chen Kong narrowed his eyes slightly. He did not continue blaming Blood Thunder King. Instead, he looked at Jian Wushuang, Xianxia, and the others. Jian Wushuang and Xianxia held Chen Kong's gaze. There are many experts in Danyang continent and I know most of them. Even if they live a low-key life, I probably have heard of them though I have never seen them. However, I have no idea who these 12 people in front of us are. I'm sure these people are not from Danyang Holy Domain, but from the Outer Realm, said Palace Keeper Sai Zhan in a deep voice. Experts from the Outer Realm? Xianxia was a little distraught. It seems that the Blood Thunder King never really wanted to join hands with me before. What he said to me before was just to clear my doubts and convince me to join hands with him. Fortunately, I am smart. Otherwise, I'd have been tricked. Jian Wushuang's glowered. Blood Thunder King thought that Jian Wushuang was also from the Outer Realm and he had backing from an undying saint and a powerful force. Therefore, Blood Thunder King spoke very sincerely to Jian Wushuang when he first met up with Jian Wushuang to discuss joining hands. Blood Thunder King and even expressed his willingness to surrender to the undying saint behind him. Even Jian Wushuang felt like believing in him. It seemed that Blood Thunder King was just lying to Jian Wushuang to trick him into making a move and to be a gunman. After Sword Alliance fought Xianxia, Chen Kong and the others would come forward to pick up the deal. As for what the undying saint would do thereafter, Blood Thunder King probably was not interested. There might be an undying saint behind Chen Kong's group as well. The void above Bane City fell silent and as if the space was stagnated. The atmosphere is cold and gloomy. Who are you? Xianxia's cold eyes stared down at Chen Kong and the others in front of him. Heavenly Modest Palace. Chen Kong replied. Heavenly Modest Palace? Xianxia's was surprised. Crimson Stone Fort was the ruler of Danyang Holy Domain as the Crimson Stone Fort Master. Apart from maintaining the situation in Crimson Stone Fort, Xianxia was also out to deal with powerful forces in other realms and domains. She was the one who found buyers for Jian Wushuang's royal blood gem and the holy treasure-level battle saber. She knew of some powerful experts in the 9 realms of Golden Crow, as well as all the big forces. There was a heavenly modest domain within the 9 realms of Golden Crow. The heavenly modest domain was larger than the Danyang holy domain, and there were more powerful experts. The forces in heavenly modest domain were as messy as Danyang holy domain, and there were countless forces behind each of them. Nonetheless, the ruler of heavenly modest domain had always been heavenly modest palace. The heavenly modest domain was dominated by the heavenly modest palace. The palace master was a powerful undying saint, and he was also the domain master of the heavenly modest domain. He had a great reputation in the entire 9 realms of Golden Crow. Besides Dragon Phoenix Pavilion and Star Picking Pavilion, Heavenly Modest Palace was among the powerful forces in 9 realms of Golden Crow. Heavenly Modest Palace left a deep impression on Xianxia when she was in the 9 realms of Golden Crow. The Heavenly Modest Domain was very close to Danyang Holy Domain, and that was precisely why the Heavenly Modest Palace Master had always been very ambitious. Blood Thunder King, you do not have any scruple to collude with the forces from the outer world just so that you can rule over Crimson Stone Fort? Xianxia's face was pale. She stared in disbelief at Blood Thunder King. Ha ha, what forces from the outer realm? As long as the Heavenly Modest Palace Master is willing, Danyang Holy Domain will become a territory of Heavenly Modest Domain sooner or later. How am I colluding with foreign forces? Blood Thunder King sneered. It's you. You should know how powerful Heavenly Modest Palace is, and you should also understand how powerful the Heavenly Modest Palace Master is. Heavenly Modest Palace had been eyeing Danyang Holy Domain for a long time. Do you think you alone can keep Danyang Holy Domain? Xianxia's expression became even more morose, and at the same time, she felt a huge amount of pressure on her shoulder. Chapter 2782 Fierce Battle. Heavenly Modest Palace was completely different from the top forces in Danyang continent. They were a big power that truly controlled a domain, and an undying saint was in charge. Crimson Stone Fort, who lost an undying saint, was coveted by the Heavenly Modest Palace. That was not a good thing. You're Xianxia, right? The black-robed old man, Chen Kong, looked at Xianxia. I know you, you're Crimson Stone Saint's daughter. The palace master said that for the sake of Crimson Stone Saint, he wouldn't be too mean to you. As long as you are willing to completely surrender to him, you can stay in the Crimson Stone Fort in the future. But if you are stubborn, then don't blame him for being cruel. Xianxia's eyes narrowed when she heard the threatening message. Before Xianxia could say anything, Jian Wushuang, who stood next to her, spoke. Your palace master sounds boastful to me. He made it sound like Crimson Stone Fort is already under his control and he can destroy it any time he wishes to. If it's that simple, I'm afraid he's here in person now, no? Chen Kong's expression changed a little. Indeed, because of some reasons, the palace master did not make the trip himself. Instead, he sent his 12 men. If the palace master was around, the dignified undying saint could easily wipe out the entire Danyang Holy Domain, and all the many forces in Danyang Holy Domain would, no doubt, surrender to him. Jian Wushuang also noticed the change in Chen Kong's expression. He knew his guessing was correct. He smiled and said, since your palace master can't make it here in person, don't you think you sound way too arrogant to say what you said to the fort master? Chen Kong's eyes immediately turned cold. Su Han from Sword Alliance. Before this, I thought you were from the outer realm like myself. I thought you probably also have the backing from an undying saint and a powerful force. At that time, I was rather cautious of you. But now, I'm sure that you have no background and your strength is only at the level of a high-level Grand Ultimate God. How dare a person like you speak to me like this? Do you have a death wish? When the word death was spoken, Chen Kong made a move already. A tyrannical gush of peak Grand Ultimate God's aura swept across instantly. Chen Kong was extremely fast. He moved like a black phantom, instantly appeared in front of Jian Wushuang. The moment Chen Kong left his spot, Jian Wushuang had already noticed it. Jian Wushuang remained in place, but he had applied the 4 domain oppression methods on Chen Kong. All the 4 domain oppression methods that were previously used to suppress the entire battlefield were then only on Chen Kong. Under the huge pressure from Jian Wushuang, Chen Kong's formidable strength was instantly suppressed by about 20%. These domain oppression methods are indeed good, but unfortunately, they are useless. Chen Kong's cold voice came and his palm raised. The tip of his index finger gathered his majestic divine power, and then he sent a shooting dark beam of light at Jian Wushuang's head like a meteor. When the dark beam of light was about to hit Jian Wushuang's head, a golden light appeared out of nowhere and placed itself in front of Jian Wushuang. This golden light was the gold-armored corpse puppet controlled by Jian Wushuang. The golden armor corpse puppet obeyed Jian Wushuang's command. It stood in front of Jian Wushuang and then swung the big saber fiercely in his hand. A mighty, magnificent saber slashed toward the dark beam of light. Bang! A low crashing sound was produced and the dark beam soon collapsed and dissipated. The gold-armored corpse puppet received a great impact. Its figure shot backward like a cannonball, retreated a long distance before it finally stopped in place. Chen Kong is powerful indeed. He's only displaying 80% of his strength under my domain oppression. He still managed to resist the gold-armored corpse puppet with only one finger. He's a peak grand ultimate god and his combat power is much stronger than Dong Shun from the divine demon sect. Chen Kong was a little surprised to see that he had just resisted an attack from a gold-armored corpse puppet. Xianxia, who was next to the void, made a command. Attack! Followed by the stern command, the grand ultimate gods under Xianxia's command fiercely attacked the opponents. Several Sword Alliance grand ultimate gods, including those corpse puppets, were attacking the opponents as well. Jian Wushuang retreated. On his way back, he displayed the vast power of his various domain oppression methods once again, targeting to suppress the opponents on the battlefield. The many grand ultimate gods from Blood Thunder King's faction, including the 12 grand ultimate gods of Heavenly Modest Palace, felt suppressed. Kill them! Chen Kong yelled. Many of the grand ultimate gods from Heavenly Modest Palace, as well as the Blood Thunder King and the others, made a move instantly. Heavenly Modest Palace coupled with Blood Thunder King's faction had a total of more than 20 grand ultimate gods. Besides that, most of them were high-level grand ultimate gods. Xianxia and Jian Wushuang joined forces. In terms of the number of grand ultimate gods, they were better off than their opponents. However, they fell short in terms of quality. After all, most of the grand ultimate gods under Xianxia's command were just primary-level grand ultimate gods. However, Jian Wushuang's domain oppression methods had managed to suppress the strength of many grand ultimate gods from the Heavenly Modest Palace and Blood Thunder King's faction by a lot. Those high-level grand ultimate gods found their strength lowered and therefore, both sides were about the same in terms of the overall combat power. Bang! 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 A series of violent attacking sounds resounded. This battle between the two sides was obviously much more intense than the previous battle between Xianxia and Yun Shan. The combat level was also much higher. The key was that both sides in the battle each have the combat power of 2 peak grand ultimate gods. Xianxia faced Chen Kong, and the gold-armored corpse puppet confronted the other peak grand ultimate gods from Heavenly Modest Palace. The battle was fierce and tough. Jian Wushuang retreated to the edge of the battlefield as soon as the battle began. He did not fire any attacking shots, but only used his 4 domain oppression methods on the opponents. He could see clearly the situation on the battlefield from where he was. Although Heavenly Modest Palace has sent 12 grand ultimate gods here and all of the 12 grand ultimate gods are powerful. Of the 10 high-level grand ultimate gods, 6 are ranked at the top, and the other 4 are at the top. They are definitely not weak among the high-level grand ultimate gods, and the 2 peak grand ultimate gods are also very powerful. Jian Wushuang, even though there was a gap in the number of grand ultimate gods between the two sides, his domain oppression methods proved helpful. They fought fiercely, yet his camp did not gain any advantage. The two sides were equal. The Heavenly Modest Palace side barely had the upper hand in the battle. Chapter 2783. Horrendous killing. The grand ultimate gods under Xianxia's lead had suffered some degree of wounds during the intense battle with Yun Shan's battle, and they had used up a lot of their divine power. This battle right now is obviously much more obvious compared to the previous one, and much more of their divine power would be depleted. I don't think they would be able to continue for much longer. Apart from that, there aren't any movements from Nanwu Palace, the Life and Death Tower, Divine Demon Sect and Dongfang Clan until now. We have to be careful of them too. This cannot continue and we have to end this battle as soon as possible. Jian Wushuang looked across the battlefield with cold eyes. He then made a move and had already rushed towards the void in front of him. At the same time, Blood Mountain Sword had already appeared in his hands. Jian Wushuang had an extremely high understanding of the space-time law, and his figure was like a ghost under the effects of the space-time law power. He easily appeared behind a high-level Grand Ultimate God that was from the Heavenly Modest Palace. The high-level Grand Ultimate God from the Heavenly Modest Palace also had a strong ability to perceive danger, and he was able to instantly detect Jian Wushuang's arrival. "You want to sneak up on me? In your dreams." This high-level Grand Ultimate God yelled out loudly, and the horrendous divine power had risen as his surroundings were transformed into complete darkness. However, before this high-level Grand Ultimate God could take action, Jian Wushuang had already pointed his finger from afar. The random point of a finger that looked normal consisted of the space-time law and was filled with the exquisite cosmic mysteries. Without any warnings, the high-level Grand Ultimate God from the Heavenly Modest Palace had been directly paused in the void and failed to make any moves. With a simple stride forward, Jian Wushuang's figure had rushed past the high-level Grand Ultimate God. "The first one." Jian Wushuang smiled. Whoosh! A huge head was directly sent flying up. Space-time had just recovered when the high-level Grand Ultimate God died, and he happened to see his head leaving his body. He could not help but widened his eyes, and his consciousness soon disappeared. A finger-pointing heavenly technique together with the speediest space-time sword technique and the fact that the space-time law contains space-time blades, the strong killing power is capable of directly piercing through the defensive armor. It's so easy for me to kill high-level Grand Ultimate Gods right now with a combination of these three. Jian Wushuang mumbled. 30 years ago, he had used a finger-pointing heavenly technique to kill at will during the face-on battle between the Sword Alliance and Divine Demon Sect. This caused the complete defeat of the Divine Demon Sect. The current Jian Wushuang was definitely stronger, and his understanding towards the space-time law was naturally higher. Activating a finger-pointing heavenly technique again meant that it was really easy to kill usual high-level Grand Ultimate Gods when he paired it with the space-time law and space-time sword technique. Whoosh! Jian Wushuang once again skimmed forward and appeared beside the second high-level Grand Ultimate God within the blink of an eye. This high-level Grand Ultimate God was an expert under Blood Thunder King's lead. Hum! A finger-pointing heavenly technique was used, and the same scene happened again. As the sword light skimmed through, several dozens of space-time blades were contained in the sword light. The horrendous killing power was not something the high-level Grand Ultimate Gods could withstand with the physical protection ability on their outer body layer. Jian Wushuang still easily beheaded this high-level Grand Ultimate God. Second one. Jian Wushuang's figure once again came swaying out. The third one. The head of another high-level Grand Ultimate God was directly chopped off, and Ying, who was fighting with this high-level Grand Ultimate God, was also stunned and did not manage to react. Within moments, 3 experts had continuously died under Jian Wushuang's sword. Apart from that, Jian Wushuang had a high-level insight, and he only killed high-level Grand Ultimate Gods while ignoring primary-level Grand Ultimate Gods. The fourth one. Another high-level Grand Ultimate God was beheaded. With the continuous death of 4 high-level Grand Ultimate Gods, both the experts from the Heavenly Modest Palace and under Blood Thunder King's lead obviously panicked. Why is this guy so strong? He's really strong, and they are high-level Grand Ultimate Gods. However, they are like animals in front of him and are simply killed? Even a real peak Grand Ultimate God would not kill high-level Grand Ultimate Gods unscrupulously like him. What is really going on with him? It's a secret technique. He has a very special secret technique and is able to make the space-time a person is in go into a stagnant state within a short period of time so that they would lose the ability to react. Space-time stagnation? A Grand Ultimate God like him has such a secret technique. Scary. Such a secret technique is really so scary. Even high-level Grand Ultimate Gods can be killed so easily. Wouldn't it be even easier for him to kill us? Heavenly Modest Palace and the experts under Blood Thunder King's lead were terrified by Jian Wushuang's horrendous killing. They were so frightened that their heads were numb and almost burst. Chen Kong, who was in a heated fight with Xianxia, naturally saw this scene, and his facial expression immediately changed. This guy's ways are really weird. This is really weird. If we allow him to continue killing, not many of these 10 high-level Grand Ultimate Gods I brought over can stay alive. Chen Kong's facial expression darkened before bursting out. Su Dao, Go, kill him. Among the 10 high-level Grand Ultimate Gods from the Heavenly Modest Palace, more than half of the high-level Grand Ultimate Gods stood on the top. However, there was another person who was at the highest point, and he was even capable of having a forced fight with the usual peak Grand Ultimate Gods. This person was Su Dao, a thin, young man in silver robes. After he heard Chen Kong's outburst, Su Dao immediately got rid of his opponent and turned into a stream of light before he came bursting towards Jian Wushuang. Jian Wushuang originally planned to continue in searching for his 5th target and kill the 5th high-level Grand Ultimate God. However, a strong wave of aura suddenly came surging towards him and directly covered him entirely. Jian Wushuang also immediately saw the young man in silver robes that came rushing towards him. This person seems to be quite strong. Jian Wushuang raised his eyebrows and went towards the figure. As he got closer to this young man in silver robes, Jian Wushuang once again pointed the pointer of his right hand. It was still a finger-pointing heavenly technique, as this skill was a killing weapon towards usual trainers and not many people were able to withstand the attack. The invisible space-time law power started its effect. This power was also implemented in the space-time Su Dao was in. Su Dao's figure suddenly paused in the middle of the sky, as he had obviously entered the state of space-time stagnation. Jian Wushuang smiled indifferently as he was prepared to move forward and kill Su Dao. However, Su Dao's eyelids suddenly fluttered and his figure once again went skimming forward. What? Jian Wushuang's facial expression slightly changed and the look in his eyes darkened. I see. It looks like this person is also an expert who's good with the space-time law and has an extremely high understanding towards the space-time law. A finger-pointing heavenly technique was a divine technique of the space-time law. This skill was undefeatable when it came to experts that practiced other laws, even when the experts were of higher levels. However, the effects were not as strong when it came to experts who also practiced the space-time law. Chapter 2784. Beheaded. Although this young man in silver robes was only a high-level Grand Ultimate God, he had an exceptionally high understanding towards the space-time law, and he might have even surpassed some peak Grand Ultimate Gods who were good at the space-time law. That was why he was able to react in the shortest period of time when enduring Jian Wushuang's finger-pointing heavenly technique and break free. This is interesting. Let's see which one of us has a higher understanding towards the space-time law then. Jian Wushuang smiled indifferently and his figure had already met the young man in silver robes. Clank! The Blood Mountain sword in Jian Wushuang's hands was only simply sent forward, but his understanding of the space-time law had already been extended. He was incredibly speedy and the sword light contained lots of space-time blades that were also extremely powerful. The mystical weapon that the young man in silver robes used was a weird black sickle. This black sickle cut across the void and left black phantomic figures. They were also filled with a huge amount of space-time law power. Both parties instantly met in the middle of the void. Clank! The sound of metal clanking could be heard before Jian Wushuang's sword principle and the young man in silver robe sickle principle completely burst out. Both parties instantly released their understanding towards the space-time law. Waves after waves of sword lights could be seen flashing outwards, and it was dense like a boundless sword sea. The young man in silver robes black sickle also skimmed through the void over and over again, leaving dense, uncountable black phantomic figures. Clank! 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 The continuous clunking sound of metal could be heard, and these two had achieved the ultimate speed. They were obviously comparing speed crazily. However, they were obviously well matched in such a competition. You are actually capable of catching up to my speed. That's quite good. Jian Wushuang raised his eyebrows. You are also the first high-level Grand Ultimate God who can catch up to my speed. Your understanding of the space-time law is definitely no lower compared to mine. I won't be able to win if we're fighting one-on-one, but it wouldn't be easy for you to defeat me. The young man in silver robes yelled. What he needed to do now was just to stop Jian Wushuang, allowing him no chance to take action in the battlefield so that he would not kill the experts from Heavenly Modest Palace and those under the lead of Blood Thunder King. As for directly defeating Jian Wushuang, he knew from the moment they got in this fight that he was incapable of winning. You want to stop me? Just by yourself? Jian Wushuang smiled coldly. Jian Wushuang slightly raised his left hand when he was still in the middle of the fight with this young man in silver robes. Hum. 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 One after another, streams of black lights could be seen flying up. Apparently, these black light streams were a cold black divine sword, the infernal crimson divine swords. A total of 9 infernal crimson divine swords floated in front of Jian Wushuang, and these 9 divine swords were covered with thick transmigration power. This scene caused the young man in silver robes to narrow his eyes. I forgot to tell you that I'm not only good in space-time law, my understanding of the transmigration law is no weaker compared to that of the space-time law. Jian Wushuang smiled devilishly. Under his control, the 9 infernal crimson divine swords instantly transformed into 9 black light streams and went attacking towards the young man in silver robes. The expression on the young man in silver robes' face slightly changed. He backed away, speedily followed by a strong wave of the black sickle in his hand. Instantly, more than a dozen space-time blades went bursting out. The space-time blades was something a person was capable of when in the second stage of the space-time law, space-time strangulation. His level of understanding towards the space-time law could be seen from the number of space-time blades formed. The young man in silver robes was capable of forming more than 70 space-time blades in an instant, and such a level was considered quite strong among peak grand ultimate gods. However, Jian Wushuang only smiled coldly the same moment this young man in silver robes released the huge number of space-time blades. At the same time, he also released a large number of space-time blades. Jian Wushuang formed a total of 80 space-time blades at this instance, and it was much more compared to the young man in silver robes. The large number of space-time blades collided into one another in the middle of the void, and Jian Wushuang, who had more blades, naturally had the upper hand. The 9 infernal crimson divine swords that went bursting forward still appeared in front of the young man in silver robes without any hindrance. The facial expression of the young man in silver robes slightly changed. He waved his hands continuously to swing the black sickle outwards and sent all 9 infernal crimson divine swords flying outwards. All sank. Jian Wushuang suddenly hardened his left hand. Those 9 infernal crimson divine swords that flew outwards converged speedily in the void. Then, a huge piece of black wood came attacking in a direct manner with overwhelming transmigration power. Compared to how it was a couple of decades ago, when Jian Wushuang displayed the second sword formation of the transmigration sword formation once again, the power was so much stronger compared to how it was previously. The huge black wood came attacking in a shattering manner, and the power it contained caused a huge change in the facial expression on the young man in the silver robe's face. Then, he held the black sickle with both his hands. Clamor! A wave of dark saber light was sent cutting outwards. This was an enormous saber light, and it left a huge saber river in the void. It was extremely powerful and was the extremity of the young man in silver robes' capability. However, when it came to the clash between power, transmigration law was much stronger than space-time law. The transmigration sword formation Jian Wushuang used was something created by Sword Lord Tong Xin, someone who was once invincible among undying saints, and his understanding of the transmigration law was also exceptionally high. As these two parties crashed into each other, bang! With a loud bang, the endless saber river only held for a short while before it dimmed down and broke apart. The young man in silver robes slightly trembled and blood trickled down the corners of his mouth as his body uncontrollably bursted backwards. However, his eyes suddenly narrowed as his body was going backwards. This was because he had already seen the 10,000 feet golden god crushing everything and coming for him under the overlook of the divine power that filled the sky in front of him. No! The young man in silver robes was shocked. However, his figure was on the way to a bursting retreat and he could not stop even if he wanted to. Jian Wushuang was extremely fast, and when he caught up, he pointed his right hand again. It was still a finger-pointing heavenly technique. This skill had a small effect on that young man in silver robes, and it could only pause the space-time he was in for a very short amount of time. However, Jian Wushuang was in front of him, and such a short period of time that seemed irrelevant was enough to cause him his life. Hum! A wave of poignant sword light suddenly lit up, and it was heartbreakingly beautiful. There was a hint of confusion in the sword light, and it was intoxicating. This was the 7th style from the space-time sword technique Jian Wushuang invented, Enchanted. This was also the strongest and fastest sword technique Jian Wushuang had. The sword light cut through mercilessly, and the young man in silver robes was directly beheaded without being able to react. Chapter 2785. Blood Thunder King died. The 5th one. Jian Wushuang held the sword single-handedly as he looked at the body of the young man in silver robes dropped downwards. However, he had a cold smile on his face. This smile of his looked like the smile of a demon in the eyes of the experts from the heavenly modest palace and those under the lead of Blood Thunder King. Su Dao actually died? Even Su Dao was easily killed by him? This Jian Yi is really scary. The experts from heavenly modest palace were extremely shocked. They understood the strength of that young man in silver robes, Su Dao, very well. Su Dao was capable of confronting even peak Grand Ultimate Gods, and it was difficult for usual peak Grand Ultimate Gods even if they wanted to kill him. However, he was simply beheaded by Jian Wushuang right now. Jian Wushuang's strength had undoubtedly arrived at the level of peak Grand Ultimate God. How scary was it when this peak Grand Ultimate God was great in the space-time law and even held some sort of secret technique that stagnated time to allow him to move willfully? Whoosh! It could be seen that Jian Wushuang went floating out again like a ghost. Right now, his target was no longer grand-level Grand Ultimate Gods. He directly took action as long as they were close to him. The 6th one. The 7th one. The 8th one. One by one, the Grand Ultimate Gods that were considered top experts in the Danyang Holy Domain were simply killed like animals in front of Jian Wushuang. Slaughter. This was an absolute slaughter. Those two peak Grand Ultimate Gods from the Heavenly Modest Palace were separately pestered by Xianxia and Gold-Armored Corpse Puppet, so they had no opportunity to take action. As these two peak Grand Ultimate Gods were unable to do anything, nobody in the entire battlefield was able to stop Jian Wushuang. He was a god of killing, and what he wanted to do was killing crazily. However, all the Grand Ultimate Gods that he had his eyes on had no chance of escaping. Instead, they were directly killed before they had time to react. Moments after killing Su Dao, Jian Wushuang killed another 5 Grand Ultimate Gods with ultimate means. Together with those 5 previously, a total of 10 Grand Ultimate Gods had died in the hands of Jian Wushuang not long since the battle began. This horrendous killing had completely stunned the experts from the Heavenly Modest Palace and those under the lead of the Blood Thunder King. Run! Run! Quickly, run! If we don't run, all of us would be killed by this Jian Yi. This is too scary, he's too scary. Both peak Grand Ultimate Gods from the Heavenly Modest Palace and Blood Thunder King had not given any orders. However, the Grand Ultimate Gods under their lead could not stand it anymore and had already started to escape crazily. They were not dumb and they knew how to observe with their eyes. Jian Wushuang's killing was really too quick and it was too scary. It was like killing animals and they were unable to withstand it. Under such circumstances, they had to think for their lives. Escaping was definitely the wisest choice. At this moment, they could not think of their own parties as protecting their own lives was the most important thing. B-starred. The unruly elder in black robes, Chen Kong, who was fighting with Xianxia, also noticed this scene and his facial expression darkened badly. He looked at Jian Wushuang deeply and was secretly regretful. He had no idea that Jian Wushuang would be so strong and had such horrendous means of killing. Under circumstances when he and the other peak Grand Ultimate God were entangled, Jian Wushuang was capable of wiping everything out. There's no other way. Retreat. Although he was secretly filled with unwillingness, Chen Kong still immediately gave orders to retreat. He was also helpless. Under such circumstances, this battle would not be continued even if he did not give the orders. Even if he forced those Grand Ultimate Gods to continue fighting with his own power, there would only be one outcome and it was to be killed by Jian Wushuang. The final result was just being defeated. If that was the case, they should just try their best to contain their combat power to return to the Heavenly Modest Palace. Retreat! Retreat! The experts from Heavenly Modest Palace and under the lead of Blood Thunder King were relieved when they heard Chen Kong's orders. They immediately thought of ways to shake off their opponents and started retreating. Xianxia's faction and the Sword Alliance definitely would not stop here. Instead, they started another round of chase to kill. As for Jian Wushuang, he already had his eyes locked on one person. Everybody can leave but him. Jian Wushuang slightly narrowed his eyes as he stared at Blood Thunder King, who also started to run and escape. Blood Thunder King was a member of the Crimson Stone Fort and leader of one of the bigger factions. As a result, he colluded with Heavenly Modest Palace, an outsider, and tried to snatch the control over the Crimson Stone Fort. He could be called as a rebellion of the Crimson Stone Fort. He definitely had to stay as he was heinous. Blood Thunder King. Jian Wushuang yelled loudly while Yin Suo, who was beside him, also had an extremely cold expression on her face. The two of them had completely locked on Blood Thunder King, but Jian Wushuang was speedily and had immediately skimmed over. Under the suppression of the huge domain, the speed of Blood Thunder King's escape was greatly reduced. Jian Wushuang caught up with him easily. Then, Jian Wushuang stretched out his right hand and pointed in the direction of the Blood Thunder King. The effects of the majestic space-time law started acting. This is bad. The expression on Blood Thunder King's face changed greatly. Jian Wushuang had used this skill many times in this battle, and Blood Thunder King clearly understood the weirdness and scariness of this skill. He was not good in the space-time law, and once he was hit by this, he might be instantly killed by Jian Wushuang under the space-time stagnation. Master Chen Kong, save me. Save me, quick. Blood Thunder King started yelling drearily. At this moment of life and death, he could only hope that those two peak grand ultimate gods from the heavenly modest palace would come to his rescue. Apart from that, only these two peak grand ultimate gods were capable of saving him. However, Chen Kong's face slightly darkened when he heard Blood Thunder King yelling. He only swept past Blood Thunder King coldly without pausing himself. Chen Kong totally ignored Blood Thunder King's call for help, so naturally none of the grand ultimate gods from the heavenly modest palace would go rescue him. As for the grand ultimate gods that were under Blood Thunder King's lead, there were a small number of them left, but their strength was beneath him. They were completely frightened of Jian Wushuang, and humans were selfish. They were unable to protect themselves under such circumstances. Who would exchange for Blood Thunder King's life with their own lives? No. No. Blood Thunder King became extremely frightened when he saw that none of the surrounding experts paid notice to him. A hint of desperation appeared in his eyes. Without any indication, the space-time the Blood Thunder King was in complete stagnation, and he entered a state of stagnation, losing the ability to resist. Jian Wushuang crossed paths with Blood Thunder King and beheaded him with his cold sword light. The Blood Thunder King had finally died. Chapter 2786. Another unforeseen event. Whoosh. 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 The experts from Heavenly Modest Palace and under the lead of Blood Thunder King who were escaping managed to do so. On the battlefield, many of the experts from Yin Suo's faction and the Sword Alliance stood there. They were shocked when they saw Blood Thunder King's body fall down slowly. As the leader of one of the three biggest factions in the Crimson Stone Fort, Blood Thunder King had been controlling the Crimson Stone official army since long ago, and he had a high prestige in the Crimson Stone Fort. For a long period of time, Blood Thunder King had been having a crazy fight with Yin Suo and Yun Shan's factions. Right now, Blood Thunder King has finally died. With the death of Blood Thunder King, his faction will naturally break apart. Yun Shan's faction had also been badly hit, and they aren't capable of causing any more trouble. Has the lengthy internal battles of the Crimson Stone Fort finally ended? Palace Keeper Sai Zhan mumbled to himself, but his heart was secretly filled with melancholy. Beside him, many of the experts from Yin Suo's faction had a complicated feeling. The Crimson Stone Fort was originally the publicly recognized domineering party in the Danyang Holy Domain. It was originally a huge force, but their strength had been continuously weakened as internal battles had never stopped after the death of the Crimson Stone Saint. However, such fights had finally come to an end. Among all the factions in the Crimson Stone Fort, the person who managed to stand to the end was still the true descendant of the Crimson Stone Fort, Yin Suo. Has it finally ended? Yin Suo also mumbled as her body slightly trembled. The internal fight of the Crimson Stone Fort has ended, but you shouldn't be happy so early on. Jian Wushuang suddenly said. Yin Suo slightly focused her line of sight. Palace Keeper Sai Zhan and the others had turned to look at Jian Wushuang. This battle took a long period of time, from battling Yun Shan's faction in the beginning to defeating the Heavenly Modest Palace and Blood Thunder King's faction. It's impossible that the pinnacle forces of the Danyang continent did not realize what's happening in such a long period of time. However, we still haven't seen any of them until now. Jian Wushuang said coldly. The facial expressions of the people there turned into a serious one when they heard this. It was true that Yin Suo planned to have a swift battle previously. She wanted to defeat Yun Shan and Blood Thunder King's factions before the Pinnacle forces realized what was happening. However, the truth was that they had used too much time. This was also because the appearance of the heavenly modest palace was unexpected. They had no other option but to spend such a long period of time defeating the heavenly modest palace and Blood Thunder King's faction. Such a long period of time was sufficient for the Pinnacle forces to prepare themselves. If I guess correctly, the experts from the 4 Pinnacle forces, Nanwu Palace, Life and Death Tower, Divine Demon Sect and Dongfang Clan had arrived near Bane City. The reason they did not show themselves is because they are waiting for both sides to suffer losses and they shall benefit from our dispute after the results are out. Jian Wushuang's eyes turned cold. Now that the battle is over, the experts from these 4 Pinnacle forces are about to show themselves. The experts in the surrounding area started looking at the surrounding voids after they heard what Jian Wushuang said. Certainly. There they are. An exclaiming voice could be heard. Everybody immediately followed the voice and looked in that direction. A large number of densely packed black spots could be seen at the edge of a faraway void. These black spots were rushing over at an extraordinary speed. Within moments, a huge number of figures had appeared before Jian Wushuang and the others. Waves of domineering divine power came spreading from these figures. As they felt this divine power, Jian Wushuang, Xianxia, and the experts under their lead had darkened expressions on their faces. Nanwu Palace, Life and Death Tower, Dongfang Clan and the badly wounded Divine Demon Sect had really come over. Xianxia gritted her teeth as the look in her eyes turned to a cold one. At this moment, the people standing in front of them were the experts from these 4 Pinnacle forces. The appearance of these 4 Pinnacle forces at the same time meant that they had united and formed a coalition force. However, the coalition force of these 4 Pinnacle forces was extremely strong. The experts that arrived on scene were of the Grand Ultimate God level and there were more than 50 of them. That was right, more than 50 Grand Ultimate Gods. This was the combat power formed when the 4 Pinnacle forces united. Among them, the strongest Nanwu Palace had almost 20 Grand Ultimate Gods. As the Life and Death Tower and Dongfang Clan almost sent everybody that they had, it was also a significant number from their side. As for the Divine Demon Sect, as they were badly defeated and lost 9 Grand Ultimate Gods previously, they could only come up with a couple of Grand Ultimate Gods due to the pressure they withstand from the outside world throughout the years. However, these 4 Pinnacle forces still accumulated more than 50 Grand Ultimate Gods in total. Such a number of Grand Ultimate Gods in a holy domain was sufficient to scare one to death. If the Crimson Stone Fort was still in its peak era or before the bigger factions had not really fought, an alliance between Xianxia, Yun Shan, and Blood Thunder King's factions might be sufficient to withstand the coalition force between these 4 Pinnacle forces. However, the Blood Thunder King's faction had been completely defeated and he was dead right now. Yun Shan's faction had also suffered a horrendous blow and only 4 badly wounded people were left alive. Even the strongest faction that belonged to Xianxia had also lost many Grand Ultimate Gods in 2 consecutive battles. Those that were still alive were wounded and had suffered a great depletion in their divine power. Even if they considered the Sword Alliance, the combat power of Grand Ultimate Gods that they had at the moment were less than 30 people. Apart from that, all 4 Pinnacle forces had peak Grand Ultimate Gods as their leaders, and that meant that the coalition force had a total of 4 peak Grand Ultimate Gods. Among them, Nanwu Palace Master was even the publicly recognized #1 expert in the Danyang Holy Domain. In terms of the highest combat power level, the alliance of the 4 Pinnacle forces had complete superiority. In the void on top of Bane City, the coalition force stood facing Jian Wushuang, Xianxia, and the others some distance away. The experts in the coalition force formed by those 4 Pinnacle forces were extremely excited at that moment. Ha ha! Xianxia and Su Han, the 2 of you had put on a good show for us. Nanwu Palace Master's loud laugh could be heard reverberating throughout the entire sky and land. The coalition force formed of those 4 Pinnacle forces had received news since early on and they had immediately rushed over. When they arrived, the fight between Xianxia and Yun Shan's factions had not ended, so they had seen almost the entirety of this great battle. That included the last-minute team changing of the Sword Alliance, appearance of the experts from the Heavenly Modest Palace, and also the attack Jian Wushuang carried out in the end that wiped out everything. They also saw the scene of him killing Blood Thunder King. Su Han, no, I should call you Jian Yi. Your way surprises even me. Nanwu Palace Master looked at Jian Wushuang with a smile on his face. The Life and Death Tower Master and Dongfang Clan Master beside him also looked at Jian Wushuang with weird looks on their faces. Only Dong Shun, the Divine Demon Sect Master, looked at Jian Wushuang with a huge amount of anger and will to kill. Chapter 2787. Unite against foreign forces different from the experts in the coalition force formed by the four pinnacle forces. The experts from Xianxia's faction and Sword Alliance had extremely darkened expressions. The situation right now was obviously unfavorable for them. For Master, Jian Wushuang appeared beside Xianxia and asked softly, "This is an important battle and there are quite a lot of unforeseen events. You should have predicted this, so you must have reserved some backhands." "I prepared some, but it's still not enough for us to go up against the coalition force formed by the four pinnacle forces. After all, not only do they have lots of experts, they did not go through a huge battle just now and are still in peak condition. Our people on the other hand had gone through 2 continuous battles and suffered some serious wounds. Apart from that, the consumption of their divine power are quite great."
Xianxia sighed.
"I know that. However, it's good enough that you've prepared some backup as I've also prepared some backhands," Jian Wushuang said. "What?" Xianxia looked at Jian Wushuang in surprise. At this moment, whoosh, 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 4 figures came skimming over from a nearby void and appeared at the edge of the battlefield. The expressions of the experts from both parties slightly changed when they saw these 4 figures. Yun Shan. Xianxia's facial expression also slightly darkened. Yun Shan's faction had been directly defeated previously and only 4 out of their many experts were alive. Yun Shan was one of those 4. Following the altercation between Xianxia and Blood Thunder King's factions, Yun Shan grabbed the opportunity to leave. However, Yun Shan had appeared once again at this crucial moment. After observing the divine power of those 3 people behind him, it was obvious that the 4 of them had taken the opportunity just now to heal themselves as their condition and divine power had obviously recovered quite a bit. However, what Xianxia did not understand was what Yun Shan planned to do by appearing again at this moment. Yun Shan had a darkened look on his face when he was stared at by so many experts. He glanced at Xianxia and a complicated look flashed past his eyes. His eyes turned incredibly cold as he turned to look towards the coalition force formed by the 4 pinnacle forces. "Qian Mu, come out!" A loud yell could be heard blasting through the sky and earth. This blasting yell consisted of unprecedented anger and horrendous will to kill, causing many experts there to tremble uncontrollably. "Qian Mu?" Xianxia frowned and immediately looked towards the coalition force formed by the 4 pinnacle forces. Surely, a thin elder in black robes slowly raised his head, showing a cold and weird smile on his face. "Qian Mu!" Xianxia immediately yelled with both anger and surprise. It's Grand Ultimate God Qian Mu and is under Yun Shan's lead. Yun Shan had always trusted him throughout the years. Palace Keeper Sai Zhen's facial expression also changed. What's going on? Why is Grand Ultimate God Qian Mu among the coalition force formed by the 4 pinnacle forces? From the looks of Yun Shan's action, could it be that? Xianxia and Palace Keeper Sai Zhen immediately thought of a possibility. "Ha ha! Yun Shan, I've followed you for so many years. Do you need to act like this the moment we meet?" The cold elder covered under black robes, Grand Ultimate God Qian Mu, laughed weirdly as his eyes were filled with a mocking look. "How dare you mention that you followed me for many years?" Yun Shan said coldly. "Have I treated you badly throughout the years? How dare you betray me and the Crimson Stone Fort? How dare you scheme against me?" Betray? That would be a wrong word to use. Yun Shan, you had always acted out with consideration of the Crimson Stone Fort even though Xianxia had already had the upper hand. You knew that Xianxia was much stronger than you, yet you were still dumb enough that you wanted to rely on your own power. You deserve to be wiped out by Xianxia. I was only helping you. Grand Ultimate God Qian Mu laughed mockingly. After that, Grand Ultimate God Qian Mu glanced at Nanwu Palace Master and said with ridicule, "Palace Master, I was right. If I purposely give the game away and let Xianxia's people know that I'm in contact with Nanwu Palace, Xianxia would definitely take action the next second. It is true that we have to thank you this time, or we would not know how long we need to wait for Xianxia to take action against Yunshan, and the coalition of our 4 pinnacle forces would not have obtained such an upper hand so easily. After this is over and we wipe out the Crimson Stone Fort, you will definitely receive benefits from us, Nanwu Palace Master said with a smile. Thank you, Palace Master. Grand Ultimate God Tianmu was delighted. After listening to the conversation among those two, not only Xianxia and Palace Keeper Xianxia, even Jian Wushuang and the Grand Ultimate Gods under his lead also understood what was happening. Dear Menet. Turns out, everything was made up by Tianmu. Palace Keeper Xianxia had a darkened look on his face. Although Great Elder Yunshan had always been fighting with Fort Master, he had never borrowed the power of outer forces and had always been snatching the control of Crimson Stone Fort from Fort Master with his own power. I had been wondering why he would suddenly compromise with Nanwu Palace and ask them for help. Turns out that Great Elder Yunshan had never contacted Nanwu Palace and everything was made up by Grand Ultimate God Tianmu. Palace Keeper Xianxia was Xianxia's right-hand man and he had the clearest information about things in the Crimson Stone Palace. Xianxia decided to directly take action against Yunshan's faction because she received news that Yunshan's faction was already in contact with Nanwu Palace. Leaving her with no choice, Xianxia was forced to immediately take action. The reason they received news that Yunshan's faction was in contact with Nanwu Palace was because of Grand Ultimate God Tianmu. All this time, Grand Ultimate God Tianmu had been the one contacting Nanwu Palace and he even led the experts from Nanwu Palace to meet Yunshan. As Grand Ultimate God Tianmu was one of the people Yunshan trusted the most, such actions had caused Palace Keeper Xianxia to have misunderstood that Yunshan was the one in contact with Nanwu Palace. However, he only learned right now that everything was just made up by Grand Ultimate God Tianmu. He purposely put up an act to cause a misunderstanding on their side so that Xianxia would decide to immediately take action against Yunshan. It could be said that Grand Ultimate God Tianmu had schemed against both Xianxia and Yunshan's factions. B-starred. Xianxia had a cold look in her eyes as she said the word. Xianxia. Yunshan spoke in a powerful voice and he had already looked towards Xianxia. He had a complicated look in his eyes, but he still spoke up. As we're facing some powerful enemies, shall we put aside our differences and think of a way to work together and solve the issues in front of us? What do you think? Sure. Xianxia nodded without hesitation. She also hoped to form an alliance with Yunshan. After all, no matter how big the hatred or how bad the fight between her and Yunshan was, they were internal issues of the Crimson Stone Fort. No matter who won in the end, the Crimson Stone Fort was still there and only the leader was different. However, if the alliance of these 4 pinnacle forces had their way, the long-time basis of the Crimson Stone Fort would completely disappear. Chapter 2788. Back up in just a short moment, Xianxia and Yunshan had already decided to set aside their grudges and unite against the enemy. This scene was naturally witnessed by the 4 great factions. Yunshan, I do admire you a little. This Xianxia has just severely injured your faction and killed many of the Grand Divine Paragons under her command. You yourself have been forced into an extremely sorry state by her. How long has it been? You can actually endure this and take the initiative to join forces with Xianxia? Namo Palace Master looked at Yunshan in surprise. Although this old man is not satisfied with this little girl becoming the new Fort Lord of the Red Stone Castle and has been fighting with her for so many years, no matter how fierce our fight is, it is still an internal matter of the Red Stone Castle. And this Red Stone Castle is the foundation that the Red Stone Saint and I jointly created. This old man has poured almost all of my blood, sweat, and tears into it. Compared to the survival of the Red Stone Castle, this old man will put down any personal grudges. Yunshan said coldly. Oh. Palatial Lord Nam narrowed his eyes. Jian Wushuang could not help but glance at Yunshan. Previously, he did not know much about Yunshan and only knew how to help Xianxia defeat it. However, he now had some respect for Yunshan. Indeed, perhaps Yunshan was unwilling to accept Xianxia, but he would definitely give his all to the Red Stone Castle. With Yunshan's help and the backup that Xianxia and I have prepared, perhaps we can really fight against the allied forces of the 4 great organizations, Jian Wushuang murmured. Namo, cut the crap with them. Just attack. The Grand Divine Warriors under Yin Sua's faction have been taking advantage of the time to recover their injuries and their divine power. If we don't attack now, once they've all recovered, we won't have an absolute chance of victory, the Pavilion Master of Life and Death said coldly. Palatial Lord Nam nodded slightly. We have a huge advantage in this battle. We have at least a 90% chance of victory, but we can't be careless. Also, we need to be careful of that Xianxia. His ability to freeze time and space is too strange. Moreover, his comprehension of the laws of space and time is extraordinarily high. Killing ordinary high-level Grand Divine Paragons is like slaughtering chickens and dogs. Although our allied army has many Grand Divine Paragons, we can't withstand his unscrupulous slaughter, so we need to think of a way to prevent him from slaughtering us, said the Patriarch. That's simple. Just arrange for a peak-level god supremacy to fight him. Palatial Lord Nam smiled. East God, this Sword One has made your God-fiend sect so miserable. Now, I'll hand him over to you. How about it? I am more than happy to do so. I will definitely skin this brat alive and tear his bones apart. The Eastern deity's gaze was cold as he stared fixedly at Jian Wushuang. Do it. Palatial Lord Nam smiled coldly. In an instant, the more than 50 Grand Divine Warriors from the alliance of the 4 factions behind him moved. There were more than 50 Divine Masters, each of them exuding a powerful aura that surged over like a torrent. Coming. Jian Wushuang, Yin Sua, Yunshan, and the others had solemn expressions. Fort Lord, if you have any backup plans, use them quickly, the unparalleled sword said. Yes. Yin Sua nodded, then immediately took out a command talisman and crushed it. As soon as he crushed the talisman, the experts hiding in the nearby space that Yin Sua had arranged beforehand moved. Swoosh, 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 swoosh. In the surrounding space, 8 figures shot over at an astonishing speed. These 8 figures were also 8 great divine paragons. Among them, there were 3 high-level great divine paragons. Those are people from Baiyun Prefecture, Demon Sealing Hall, and Eclipse Sect. 3 first-rate factions. The experts from both factions were surprised to see these 8 people. HMH, Yin Sua, looks like I still underestimated you. I never thought that you would have prepared a backup plan. Although I don't know what benefits these 3 experts from the first-rate factions have obtained from you to actually help you, they're just 3 first-rate factions. They only have 8 god supremacies. Do you think they can change anything? Palatial Lord Nam smiled disdainfully. Although the appearance of the 8 divine venerates had greatly improved Yin Sua's faction, the difference between their factions was too great. Even if Yin Sua had 8 more divine sovereigns now, her overall strength was still greatly inferior when compared to the joint forces of the 4 great powers. Moreover, in terms of the highest battle prowess, the difference was extremely great. Palatial Lord Nam's aura was overwhelming, far stronger than anyone present. He was also at the forefront of the coalition forces. As soon as he charged over, only Yin Sua from the Red Stone Castle and the Sword Union dared to face him head-on. However, when Yin Sua exchanged blows with Palace Master Nan Wu, bang! A deep sound of collision rang out. Yin Sua's face paled, and she instantly retreated explosively. Although they were both peak divine venerates, the difference between their strengths was instantly revealed. Palace Master Nanshu was indeed worthy of being the publicly accepted #1 expert of the Saints' world. Even though he was slightly suppressed by Jian Wushuang's domain and his strength was slightly limited, his battle prowess was still much greater than Yin Sua's. In a one-on-one battle, Yin Sua was definitely not Palace Master Namo's opponent. Jian Wushuang's expression darkened when he saw this. Elder Tong. A loud roar reverberated through the world. In the next moment, Elder Tong, who had remained hidden in the dark, charged into the battlefield as a streak of light. He immediately began to fight Palace leader Nan Wu. You're Old Tong, you've broken through? Palace leader Nan Wu was rather surprised when he saw the peak Exalt Tong who had appeared before him. Haha, I've only broken through recently as well. I really am lucky to be able to fight against the strongest expert of the Saints' world right after breaking through. Old Tong laughed aloud. HMH, so what if you've broken through? If you dare stop me, you'll die without a doubt. Namo Palace Master shouted coldly. The terrifying aura on his body completely pressed down on Elder Tong. Only when he truly came face to face with the leader of the Namo Palace could Elder Tong sense the tremendous pressure from her. He also understood that the #1 expert of the sacred elixir world was not just for show. Fort Lord Yin, let's join forces and fight Palace Lord Nanwu. How about it? Old Tong said. All right. Xianxia nodded heavily. In a one-on-one battle, neither of them was a match for the Namo Palace Master. If they worked together, they might be able to put up a fight. Boom! Boom! At the center of the battlefield, Xianxia and Elder Tong joined forces to fight Palace Master Nanwu. However, it was very obvious that even if the two of them worked together, they would not be able to gain any advantage over Palace Master Nanwu. However, no matter what, the two of them were still entangled with the most terrifying battle prowess of Namo Palace Master. As for the other battlefields. Chapter 2789. Jian Wushuang and the Eastern God Boom. Jian Wushuang's 4 realms continued to suppress the experts of the 4 forces in an attempt to suppress their strength. However, as soon as his realm swept out, the silver-haired old woman, Master Dongfang, smiled indifferently and said, "You're not the only one who has realm techniques." As soon as she finished speaking, the master of the Dongfang family waved his hand slightly, and immediately, a vast green ocean swept out. The green ocean was magnificent, and its waves surged wildly. On top of the green ocean, there was a faint layer of blood-colored fog. The green ocean was cast by a domain-type treasure in the hands of the master of the Dongfang family, and the blood-colored fog was a secret skill cast by the master of the Dongfang family. The combination of the two, together with the fact that the master of the Dongfang family's Dao world was not weak, swept out at this moment and directly collided with Jian Wushuang's 4-layered domain. Buzz, buzz, buzz. The two different domains pressed against each other crazily, but it was obvious that Jian Wushuang's domain was stronger and completely suppressed the master of the Dongfang family's domain. However, the Dongfang family's domain also took a lot of pressure on the experts of the 4 forces allied army. The pressure on the experts of the 4 forces allied army was obviously not as great as before. After the battle between the two camps, most of the experts of Crimson Rock Castle had not recovered to their peak condition, and some of them were seriously injured. Even with Xianxia's backup plan and the 8 great divine masters joining, their overall battle strength was still much weaker than that of the 4 forces allied army. The only good news was that Jian Wushuang still had a certain advantage in his domain, which made their opponent's battle strength more or less suppressed. Even if they could not defeat these elementary and advanced great divine masters, they could still hold on for a while. As for the strongest battle strength, Palace Master Nanwu was blocked by Xianxia and Elder Tong, while the Tower Master of Life and Death fought against Yun Shan. Although Yun Shan had been severely injured, he had recovered more than 80% of his strength after a period of time. He was strong enough to fight the Life and Death Tower Master head-on. The Dongfang family master was the weakest among the 4 peak divine masters in the 4 forces allied army. She was fighting against the golden armored corpse puppet controlled by Jian Wushuang. The golden armored corpse puppet could also tie down the Dongfang family master with its advantage in a certain domain. Among the 4 forces, there was only one peak great divine master left. This peak great divine master was the sect master of the divine demon sect, East God. Sword 1. His cold voice echoed throughout the battlefield. East God's eyes were cold, and he had locked his eyes on Jian Wushuang the moment the battle began. His opponent was Jian Wushuang. Dongshan, do you want to take revenge for the 9 great divine masters of your divine demon sect? Jian Wushuang stood in the void and looked at Dongshan coldly. Dongshan did not waste any words. The violent aura on his body instantly surged up. A giant axe appeared in each of his hands. His body immediately transformed into an ancient ferocious beast. It was an enraged ancient ferocious beast that suddenly attacked. Its speed was also extremely fast. Jian Wushuang stood there and felt that a violent and tyrannical aura had completely locked onto him. The monstrous killing intent made Jian Wushuang's eyes freeze. He tightened the Blood Mountain sword in his hand and directly rushed out in the center of the void. Jian Wushuang came into direct contact with his body. Destroy! Dongshan shouted. The giant axe in his hand was so domineering that it seemed as if it could split the heaven and earth. One of the giant axes hacked down furiously. Swish! A mighty axe shadow immediately slashed out. This axe shadow was extremely overbearing and unreasonable. Its power was even more terrifying. Jian Wushuang held the Blood Mountain sword with both hands at the same time. Surging divine power surged out of his body, and his power reached its peak at this moment. Buzz! A dazzling sword light that shook the heaven and earth suddenly rushed out. The sword light was extremely huge and covered half of the sky. Its power was also astonishing. In the blink of an eye, the mighty axe shadow came into direct contact with the huge and dazzling sword light. Clang! With a loud sound, the violent divine power spread out crazily in all directions like a tide. At the center of the collision, a huge divine power storm swept up. Jian Wushuang's face darkened slightly. He could feel a huge force coming toward him, which made his divine body tremble crazily. He immediately retreated a great distance. Before he could stop, the East God in front of him had already chased after him. The two giant axes in the East God's hands were already filled with surging divine power. Jian Wushuang narrowed his eyes and gently raised his hand. The 9 underworld blood divine swords immediately floated in front of him and formed a sword formation. Buzz! Under the cover of a large amount of reincarnation power, a giant black would rush toward the East God like a meteorite. Get lost! The East God shouted and casually slashed with the huge axe in his hand. The terrifying power contained in the huge axe struck the huge black tree, which was immediately sent flying. In the middle of the attack, the huge black tree was still shaking crazily and was about to collapse. This scene caused Jian Wushuang's expression to change slightly. The power of the reincarnation sword formation is powerful. The world sync of the second sword formation I'm using now is purely about power. It's a pity that the 9 underworld blood divine swords that make up the sword formation are too weak. Otherwise, even if my divine power is weaker than his, I wouldn't be nearly disintegrated by the axe, Jian Wushuang thought. He was still using the 9 Netherblood divine swords to form the reincarnation sword formation. It should be known that he had used the 9 Netherblood divine swords when he first obtained the reincarnation sword formation when he was an Earth God Master. The Netherblood divine sword was only a standard magic weapon at the elementary divine treasure level. It was not bad when Jian Wushuang only had the battle strength of an Earth God Master and a divine God Master. However, now that he had reached the Great God Master level, especially now that he was still fighting with a peak Great Divine Master, the Netherblood divine sword was obviously not up to par. Jian Wushuang was sure that if he had formed the Samsara sword formation with 9 standard magic weapons at the superior divine treasure level, then he should be able to fight head-on with the East God by relying on the second sword formation of the Samsara sword formation. However, the East God laughed out loud and his words were full of ridicule when he casually hacked away Jian Wushuang's Samsara sword formation with his axe. Ha ha, you are just a senior great divine master. How dare you compete with me in strength? You are courting death. Chapter 2790. Strength? Over the years, Jian Wushuang had broken through to the realm of a divine master. He had obtained 50,000 divine elixirs from the battle saber and many divine elixirs from killing Saber Master and the others in the secret realm. Under the cover of the black stone, he was indeed emitting the divine power aura of a senior divine master. Therefore, the East God naturally regarded Jian Wushuang as a senior great divine master. The gap between a senior great divine master and a peak great divine master seemed to be one step away, but in fact, the gap was astonishing. The difference in the power of divine power alone was more than 10 times, and it was almost impossible to overcome. The East God's mocking words were also reasonable. However, after hearing the East God's words, Jian Wushuang smiled indifferently and said, "East God, do you think your divine power is so strong that you will definitely surpass me?" East God frowned. Jian Wushuang's smile made him feel a little uneasy. Sure enough, Jian Wushuang's body suddenly shook. Immediately after, the divine power aura emitted from his body began to surge at an alarming speed. The speed of the surge was also very terrifying. In the blink of an eye, he had risen from an advanced Great Divine Master to a peak Great Divine Master. 7-star secret skill. Jian Wushuang finally used the 7-star secret skill, which was enough to upgrade himself to a higher level. However, the 7-star secret skill had always been one of the top secret skills that Jian Wushuang relied on. Once this secret skill was used, his strength would skyrocket. However, since the beginning of the battle, Jian Wushuang had never used this skill, whether it was when he defeated the Blood Thunder King and the others, or when he fought with the allied forces of the four major forces. He was saving a trump card for himself. Even so, with his divine power, which was far stronger than that of his peers as a perfect chaotic creature, and his 100,000 feet tall Heaven Punisher, and the 9 luminaries star armor, which increased his power by 6 times. His power was already infinitely close to that of a peak Great Divine Master. In addition to his various secret skills, he could fight a slightly weaker peak Great Divine Master head-on in such a state. Now, he had finally used the 7-star secret skill as his trump card. His cultivation was at the peak of the Divine Master realm. Now that he had used the 7-star secret skill, his realm had reached the level of an elementary Great Divine Master. Under the cover of the Black Stone, his divine power aura naturally rose to the level of a peak Great Divine Master. The strength of his divine power naturally soared, and so did his overall strength. Boom! Boom! Jian Wushuang stood in the void, his divine power surging, and the tyrannical aura of divine power unscrupulously swept out. At the same time, as the strength of his divine power greatly increased, the power of his domain, which had been spreading across the entire battlefield, also skyrocketed. Previously, his domain had only suppressed Master Dongfang's domain, but now it was completely suppressed. The experts of the allied army of the four forces were also much more suppressed on the battlefield. Jian Wushuang's eyes were cold as he stared at the East God in the void. The East God also sensed the change in Jian Wushuang's divine power aura, and his pupils could not help shrinking. East God, didn't you just say that I'm not qualified to compete with you in strength? Now, let's try again. Jian Wushuang smiled indifferently. He remained still, but the 9 underworld blood divine swords in front of him reassembled again. It was also a giant black tree filled with vast samsara power, but when the giant black tree rushed out again, its momentum and power were 10 times stronger than before. Boom! The giant black tree suddenly rushed out, and the void trembled wherever it passed. East God clenched his teeth tightly, and a surge of divine power gathered on the giant axe in his right hand. The aura on his body also soared to the limit. Get lost! With another furious roar, East God once again swung the giant axe in his hand. This giant axe was powerful and heavy, and it carried a world-shaking might. It wanted to send the giant black tree flying once again. But this time, bang! As the giant black tree and the giant axe collided, 2 explosive powers exploded at the same time. The giant black tree and the giant axe had collided once before, but the giant black tree was sent flying and almost disintegrated. But now, the outcome was completely reversed. What? East God widened his eyes and looked at his palm in disbelief. He could feel a violent force coming from his palm and the giant axe. This force was so strong that the giant axe in his hand almost fell out of his hand. The force went along his arm and hit his divine body. Humph! East God could not help but grunt, but he immediately retreated. This collision was actually a direct blow to East God. Haha, East God, as a peak Great Divine Master, your divine power is only so, Jian Wushuang said with a sneer. How is this possible? East God was a little confused and could not believe what was happening. He was clearly overwhelmed by the previous collision, but now, in the blink of an eye, the situation had been completely reversed. He was being suppressed and crushed. How could the divine power of Sword One be so strong? It was much stronger than that of a peak Great Divine Master like him. In his opinion, this power was not much weaker than Palace Master Nan Wu, the #1 expert on the Pill Sun continent. East God, weren't you very proud just now? Now, let's do it again. Jian Wushuang's eyes turned cold. The giant blackwood formed by the 9 Netherblood divine swords trembled slightly, and then gathered a shocking power to charge at the East God. Seeing the giant blackwood charging toward him again, the East God clenched his teeth, and a trace of madness surged in his eyes. I don't believe it. The violent divine power rose from the East God's body, and he completely transformed into a peerless fierce beast. At the same time, his divine body was covered by a layer of blood-red light. The appearance of this blood-red light also increased his divine power aura slightly. Kill! East God was incomparably ruthless as he unleashed his full strength. He held a huge axe in each of his hands, and the two huge axes slashed out time and time again, colliding head-on with the ferocious charging black huge tree. They clashed together. Bang! 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 The collision after collision caused a shocking explosion. And even if East God used a secret art, in terms of offensive power, his huge axe was clearly inferior to the secondary incarnation sword formation by a large margin. Every collision was an absolute disadvantage for him.